With the stock rails both soldered in place, next up is we're going to form and install the switch points on the turnout. We're building a solid point turnout in these videos, which means that the point rail is a solid piece of rail all the way from the end of the points right up through to the wing rails up here. There's 6 steps in the process of forming the point rails. 1 is you cut the rail length. 2, we're going to file the switch point on one end of the rail. I'm going to use a point form tool for this. 3, we shape the rail so it closely matches the fixture, which means putting a small bend in the rail. 4 is we bend the wing rail on the very end. 5, we file a flare on the end of the wing rail. And 6, we solder it in place. Okay, first up we need to cut a length of rail. This rail should be cut a little bit longer than the distance between the end of the wing and the end of the switch points. That way it gives us some extra material to work with. So I'm going to cut a piece that's maybe an inch and a half longer. Just eyeballing that like this. And then I'm going to file a switch point on one end of this rail. The best way to do this is to use a point form tool. This does a great job of forming a very precise switch point on the end of the rail, and that can be a tricky step to do any other way. These will hold the rail very precisely on an angle while you file it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on how to use the tool. There's a separate video for that. On the diverging point rail, which is the one that curves away, it's pretty important that we pre-bend this rail so it matches the groove in the fixture. The reason being that the last place we're going to solder this rail will be on this S-tie. So between this tie and the switch points, there's nothing supporting it. And if we didn't pre-bend this curve that occurs in the turnout, when we took it out of the fixture, the rail would want to straighten itself back out and the geometry wouldn't be correct in here. The geometry on the switch point rail has a straight section right here where the switch point is. Then it goes into a radius and then straight again through the frog. We want to duplicate that same geometry on this piece of rail. So starting back from the end a little ways, I just introduce a slight curve in the rail like that. And then I just double check it to see that it matches with the groove in the fixture. Like that. And that's what we're looking for. We want to get it as close as possible, and it takes a bit of practice to get it right, but after you do 1 or 2, it's not too difficult to do. Now that we have that bend in the rail, next we need to mark the location of the wing rail. On the fixtures, there will be a small little notch right where the closure rail blends into the wing rail. And what we want to do is we want to put a little mark on the bottom of the rail at that location. I find a scribe works good for this, or an X-Acto knife tool works well. And I like to also put a little dot on the top of the rail, so it makes finding that location a little easier once we take the rail out of the fixture. So we can see that location is marked on the base of the rail. And using a set of rail cutters, what I like to do is just cut a little chunk out of the base of the rail at that location, just like that. You can see how that popped out a little triangle piece. That's exactly what we're looking for. And then I can clean it up with a triangle file like this. You can do the whole job with a triangle file as well, just by drawing it down on the rail 2 or 3 times. And what that does is it cuts a nice little relief in the rail and allows us to bend it like that. Nice, sharp, crisp bend. And that's kind of important for that the wing rail bends like that. So now I'm going to put this back in the fixture and we'll mark it to length. Where I bent that, I've actually bent it far too much. It's way past where it's supposed to be in the groove there. But that's easy to fix. I'll just, leaving it in the fixture, I'll just kind of bend it back this way, like that. There we go. And I'm just going to put a little mark on the head of the rail at the end of the groove, and I'm going to cut that rail to length. Using the rail nuppers, just going to quick snip it off like that. We'll discard that leftover piece. So now we have the diverging route point rail formed with the switch point in the end, a slight curve, and the bend and the wing rail. Next we want to file a little relief on the end of this rail. Okay, looking at a finished turnout, I just want to show you the relief that we have to form on the end of the wing rail. You can see how this rail here has kind of got a compound bevel on it. like that. And that's been filed on so as equipment rolls through the turnout this way, nothing will catch on the end of the rail. It actually acts a similar way that the flare on the end of the guardrail works. It just will help guide the rails into position as it goes through the frog. So that's a compound angle, and I'll show you how to file that onto the end of the wing rail. So we want this bevel to be on the inside of the rail. So we're going to want to taper like that towards the inside. And the best way to do that is to use the same file you use to make your switch points. And what we're going to do is we're going to be forming an angle that's on an angle this way and also on an angle this way. And it's just a couple of passes like this up the edge of the rail. There. And you can see where that's formed that compound angle. I see a lot of turnouts where this step is skipped. It's actually a fairly important step. You want to make sure that you get that bevel formed on the end of your wing rail. So just like when we put the stock rails in place, I like to start by soldering the switch point rail to the S-tie, and that will hold it in place while we go back and flux and solder the rest of the rail. There we go, that's soldered up there nice. Now we'll go and solder the rest of the PC board ties to the rail. As I explained in the stock rail video, anywhere where there's two rails side by side, it's important that you only put solder on one side. That way when we install the frog points in place, it doesn't end up sitting on top of the solder like that. And I like to hold it in place with the scribe like this while the solder cures, and see how I'm actually pushing it a little bit so I know that it's sitting solid up against the outside edge of that groove. And I hold it there until the solder cures. Now I'll go back and solder these ones up. While the turnout's in the fixture, we're going to solder only one of the switch point rails to the throw bar tie. Then the turnout is removed from the fixture, the point is propped open, and then we solder the other one outside of the fixture. You may find that you can solder this to the throw bar tie with no issues in the fixture and not get the two rails soldered together, but some people struggle with that. I'll show you a little trick to use if that's a problem for you. Just take a small piece of paper like this, a piece of tin foil will work as well. Pop the turnout out of the fixture, slide this in behind the switch point and underneath the stock rail. So I just slide that into place like that. There. And now we can safely solder that to the stock or to the throw bar tie without any concern of getting it accidentally soldered to the stock rail. And I'll do that now. So a little bit of flux on the tie and on the base of the rail. Okay, then we're just going to go in and do a quick solder joint on here. And I use a fair amount of solder. I want to make sure that this is a very good solder joint. And I've grabbed my scribe and I'm going to hold the rail in place, reheat this, and make sure that it's sitting nice and flat like that. Switch points is soldered in place, and we can take this piece of paper out now like that, and now we've got a very good solder joint without any risk of it being soldered to the stock rail. The diverging route stock rail is now in place, and we can repeat the process again for the straight route stock rail. And this one's a lot easier because we don't have to pre-bend anything. We just file the point on the end, form the wing rail, file the bevel, and solder it in place, not soldering it to the throw bar tie. Okay, now we have the straight route rail is soldered in place, the switch point's been formed, wing rail's done, and this step is complete. Now we're ready to move on to the next step.